promised that NATO would not move 1 inch eastward, and that was violated.
Those
so
countries.
You want to look at all the different people that violated their agreement.
When did America start basically just sort of representing what Moscow thinks? Those countries wanted to be part of the NATO club. Your club. Are you saying that they should never have been allowed to exercise their democratic and sovereign rights as nations and join that club?
Oh, God. You know what? I don't like having my words twisted. No. I really don't.
You don't like... Well, but that's the point of an interview, isn't it? Is to discuss.
Former Trump transition advisor and former global vice president of Republicans overseas, Jean Hayes, appeared on LBC Radio, but her interview ended abruptly. Just a few minutes in, she declared, "I'm done. I'm leaving. I don't like you," before walking away live on air. So what pushed her to that point? Lewis Goodall didn't interrupt or insult her. He simply asked direct questions. He asked whether she believed Vladimir Putin was morally responsible for invading Ukraine. She replied that Putin was only legally wrong, not morally. The interview continued, and Goodall challenged her comments about NATO. She accused him of twisting her words, even though the entire conversation was being broadcast live for everyone to hear.
Jean Hayes, former global vice president of Republicans overseas, as I say, advisor to Donald Trump's 2017 transition team. Dr. Hayes, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Do you understand why so many in this country and in Europe more generally would have seen what happened in the Oval Office as an attempt to humiliate President Zelensky and be repulsed by it?
Well, if they watched all 53 minutes, then I don't think they would have that feeling. If they saw clips of it, which of course will be clips of J.D. Vance and Trump being very angry with Zelensky, then of course they would come to that.
Could you imagine President Trump speaking to, say, President Putin in that way? And isn't it precisely the point that he wouldn't, that is part of the problem?
Well, if President Putin pushed him the way Zelensky pushed Trump,
what did Zelensky do? What did he do that was so egregious in your view?
Well, one is that he started litigating the 2014. He said, "I don't want a ceasefire."
He said he wants peace repeatedly. He just doesn't want it on Russia's terms, which you'll understand because Russia invaded his country.
But he said, "I don't want a ceasefire." He made that comment to Trump.
He said he doesn't want a ceasefire if he knows that Putin is just going to renege on it a couple of months later, which is fair enough, isn't it? Because he's done that repeatedly, you will accept.
Exactly.
No, not exactly. I mean, the point is that, of course, anyone wants a ceasefire, but there's no point having a ceasefire, is there? Which is what Zelensky was saying to Trump, if Putin is just going to renege on it shortly afterwards.
And Trump was saying, how do you really know? I mean, if you're really coming from that position, that no one can guarantee anything. But if you don't move forward to get something into an agreement and then be able to put the right security.
But what has Putin said that gives you or President Trump any indication at all that he even wants a ceasefire? Putin has said he doesn't want a ceasefire at this point.
Putin is... Look, I'm not here to have an argument because you clearly have a position that I don't agree with.
What would that be? What would that position be?
Well,
I mean, we would both agree, wouldn't we, for a start, that Putin started the war?
Yeah, what I would say is that Putin legally violated international law. Morally, he thought he was right, and strategically...
But you would agree that morally he was wrong?
I know I would not agree morally is wrong. I would agree legally he was wrong.
You would agree, you would not think that a man who literally, as we speak, still sends drone attacks to kill Ukrainian civilians is morally wrong?
Oh, and you think that Ukraine isn't doing anything to the Russians?
Ukraine didn't invade Russia. Russia invaded Ukraine. That you wouldn't agree that was morally wrong?
Okay. All right. You know what? that is 3 years ago.
Right. So if we were sat in 1942, would you have been on the radio going, "Look, don't worry about it. Hitler invaded Poland 3 years ago"?
You know what? I didn't sign on for this hypothetical discussion.
It's not hypothetical. I'm just trying to tease out the logic of what you're saying, Dr. Halper Hayes.
One is that James Baker and Thatcher and Mitterrand and Kohl, etc., had promised that NATO would not move 1 inch eastward, and that was violated.
Those
countries. You want to look at all the different people that violated their agreement?
When did America start basically just sort of representing what Moscow thinks? Those countries wanted to be part of the NATO club. Your club. Are you saying that they should never have been allowed to exercise their democratic and sovereign rights as nations and join that club?
Oh, God. You know what? I don't like having my words twisted. No, I really don't.
You don't like... Well, but that's the point of an interview, isn't it? Is to discuss what you're saying. And I'm just asking you... You're saying... With respect, Doctor, I'm just trying to understand what you're saying. You're saying that those countries should never have been allowed to join NATO, and then we wouldn't have been in this situation. And I'm saying to you that surely those countries should have been allowed...
I didn't say that. Well, see, that's why... No, hold on a minute.
But you cited what happened in the... so you're saying that it's fine for them to join NATO, then?
I didn't say any of those things, and I don't like when someone tries to give words and interpret without understanding. I'm done. Okay. I'm off. I don't like you.
Okay. Well, that's fine, Dr. Halper Hayes. Maybe some of the listeners won't like you, but that's fine. I'm entirely indifferent to that. I'm very grateful for your time. Dr. Jan Halper Hayes there, former Global Vice President of Republicans overseas. Apparently, I'm not going to be on her Christmas card list. Maybe I will be with Oliver.
Let's break down what really happened during that interview, because it wasn't hostile or unfair. It was simply a journalist asking a former Trump advisor to explain the positions she came on air to defend, and those positions quickly fell apart under basic questioning. The most revealing moment came when Lewis Goodall asked a straightforward question: was Vladimir Putin morally wrong to invade Ukraine? Not legally, morally. Her response was startling. She said Putin may have been legally wrong, but not morally, arguing that Putin believed he was doing the right thing. Think about what that means. A former Trump transition advisor went on national radio and refused to say that launching an unprovoked invasion, killing civilians, destroying cities, and attacking hospitals was morally wrong. She didn't present a convincing argument or an alternative moral framework. Instead, she relied on Putin's own justification for his actions, as though believing you're right somehow makes your actions morally acceptable. Goodall didn't put words in her mouth. He simply followed her logic to its conclusion, and the result was a position that became increasingly difficult to defend. Then came the question about Volodymyr Zelensky. She claimed Zelensky had provoked Donald Trump during their Oval Office meeting and had done something egregious. Goodall asked the obvious follow-up: what exactly did Zelensky do? She couldn't provide a clear answer. Instead, she said Zelensky kept bringing up the events of 2014 and opposed a ceasefire. Goodall pointed out that discussing 2014 is simply providing historical context, especially when Russia has repeatedly violated previous agreements. Rejecting a ceasefire without meaningful security guarantees isn't rejecting peace. It's refusing to accept terms that could leave Ukraine vulnerable once again. Unable to address those points, she shifted the conversation to whether Trump was simply asking reasonable questions about trusting Russia. But that ignores the reality that the burden of proving trustworthiness falls on the country that launched the invasion, not on the country defending itself. The discussion then turned to NATO, where she repeated the familiar argument that NATO's eastward expansion provoked Russia. Goodall challenged that claim by asking whether sovereign countries like Poland, the Baltic states, Hungary, and the Czech Republic had the right to choose their own alliances. Those nations joined NATO because they freely decided to do so after decades of Soviet domination. The implication of her argument was clear: that Russia should have a veto over its neighbors' foreign policy choices. When Goodall pressed her to say that openly, she accused him of twisting her words instead of answering the question. But he wasn't twisting anything. He was asking her to defend the logical consequences of the arguments she had already made. That's what ultimately ended the interview. Goodall remained calm, asked reasonable follow-up questions and gave her every opportunity to explain her position. There was no shouting, no personal attacks, and no gotcha tactics. He simply kept asking for evidence and clarification. When she couldn't provide either, she claimed her words were being twisted and ended the interview herself. In the end, it wasn't the questioning that caused the interview to unravel. It was the inability to defend the arguments.